And they really need to streamline it because they're spending a lot of money trying to figure out who does what.
Okay, very good. And yeah, that Microsoft thing sounds interesting. What type of, do you know very much about what type of communication they're trying to set up?
It's a program that works a lot like instant messaging. It's called Microsoft Vine, and right now it's in the beta testing phases, but if you Google Microsoft Vine, you'll be able to find it and be able to beta test it. I know I'm personally a beta tester of it, and it's a really neat program because you just download it on your computer. You could link it to your cell phone so you could send text messages, which is really fabulous because oftentimes when cell phone systems go down, text messages through the SMS will go through when the cell phones don't. And what this will allow you to do is to send out messages to people who you define as emergency contacts, be it your brother, your mother, your father, your nephew, your cousin, whomever. And it will automatically broadcast a message should you text it in to let everybody know that you're safe and well. And so that they could go ahead and contact everyone else. So that's the way that we really, in order to not stress the cell phone systems, we suggest that you have one contact person within your family and in the another part, possibly out of state, and they're responsible for contacting everybody else to say, you know, Phil's okay. And so that's really what this does. It also allows you to put in specific addresses of people that, or places that are important to you, and will let you look at news articles from that specific location. So if there's a bomb threat, you'll be able to go on there and see it. It's quite neat software.
Sounds good. I know a lot of times during storms, the electricity goes out. Lately in my neighborhood, the electricity goes out even when it isn't raining or windy. I don't know what the deal is with that. From your perspective, is there an efficient working between emergency management and for our area, JEA? I know in our area, JEA is a pseudo-governmental organization.
I think JEA does the best of their abilities to be able to return services. They cover a very, very large area, and their workers are actually very good at having no problem with working overtime in order to restore the services. If there's any complaint that I think could be said, and it's the same way with the city of Jacksonville in some respects, is that they're almost too big for their own good. And that it's always there's a lot of finger pointing, well, he should be doing this, well, she should be doing that. And then the other people just do the same thing. And I think that if they streamline it, figure out who actually has the important roles of making, if not making the organization smaller to be able to run more efficiently, and I think that to be able to better manage their recovery responsibilities after a storm, and maybe even everyday organizational responsibilities.
I worked, I did a small internship while taking classes at UNF. I did an internship at JEA, and I can concur the period of time I worked there, this was a time when the company felt that the electricity was going to be deregulated the same way the phone companies were. So they were looking at becoming efficient. They decided to add Six Sigma, and I actually worked on a project in the procurement area. We had a problem where the JEA, they were paying all this extra money in interest payments because they weren't making payments on time, not because they didn't have the money, but because the people responsible for signing off on the invoices weren't. It was a communication problem. So I would contact them, and I'd bully them by using names of people above me, and it got more efficient. I really doubt they're as efficient as they were when I was there, because ultimately the deregulation hasn't taken hold, and it's a government agency, and it's one of those things where if you grow your budget, you're going to be rewarded there.
Right.
So I wouldn't expect them to become more efficient anytime soon.
And I'd like to add to that efficiency does not necessarily mean small, and small doesn't necessarily mean efficient, because we know that JEA has recently let off hundreds of employees, but that doesn't mean that they've become efficient. And they think that the key here is not only small in the terms of you don't have 100,000 or 20,000 employees or whatever it is, but also efficient in what you do, because efficiency in return saves money more than necessarily small does. And so since they've cut people, they haven't necessarily become more efficient. So it's how to streamline, it's how to define people's roles better and not having one person handle 6 people's jobs, because that's not helping anything. If anything, it's making the problem worse.
Well, sometimes when large organizations, large organizations such as government, when they need to make cuts, because they're so large, they don't make the right cuts. They become top heavy, and when they make cuts, they just make arbitrarily 10% cuts across the board, or they cut lower level people who are actually doing the production, whereas administrators, maybe they could be cut because you only need so many chiefs, you know, only so many cooks in the kitchen.
Right. And it's important to have managers only through the role of delegation. As when you have, so for example, a budget office, there are a lot of responsibilities that go to that. So you need a good manager to be able to manage the team of the people that are underneath them. And we see that a lot in emergency management through a structure called incident command structure, where you only have, where you have a defined leader, and then underneath them, different leaders that lead a team of no more than 7 people, in order to be able to make sure that there is efficiency, that make sure that we are out there getting the things done. And so that's a good theory that could be applied to that as well, because you need the people that are in good leadership roles, but you also have to have the good peons below them. And I think that's sometimes where we get mistaken, is that government doesn't have to be inefficient. Government doesn't have to be bad, but it can run good. And we as citizens have the power to be able to control that through our elected officials to some extent. And I think that we really need to take a bigger role in what is going on in our local governments. I mean, the federal government itself is very important to what goes on in our lives, but our daily lives have definitely more effect on what happens in our local government. You know, who fixes our roads, make sure the sewers are running, and we need to be able to be more active in that on local level to be able to really improve more of our lives.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it seems like the theme of this is really about personal responsibility. Really, prior to Katrina, I myself hadn't even heard of FEMA. When I thought of somebody coming to help hurricane victims, I would have thought of the Red Cross. It worries me that now I think I've talked to some people, and sometimes people think, well, if a hurricane comes and FEMA will come and take care of things, whereas my parents, they live in the Gulf Coast of Alabama. They went throughout Ivan. When I mean they went through Ivan, they drove to Tennessee and stayed in a hotel and came back. For them, their experience with FEMA was that they kind of come in after the fact, which is good, but they don't. It's not really about saving your life or anything like that. In fact, for them, a lot of people, there's these vouchers you get, and you you write into FEMA and you say that you were through the hurricane, and they evaluate it. And if you buy hurricane supplies, such as my parents, they bought a generator, and some of the neighbors did, and they will reimburse you for it. My perspective is kind of where, you know, if you can already afford to pay cash for a generator, and you live in a hurricane zone where it behooves you to have such a thing, does the government really need to be coming in and paying for the generator after the fact? Now, I mean, for people that can't afford it at all, there's always a humanitarian point of view, but this isn't for them. You have to actually buy it first, so it's not about helping poor people or anything like that.
No, it really isn't, and the FEMA has a very defined role as set forth in the Stafford Act, and you could read more about it if you know anything about the Code of Federal Regulations. It's actually 44 CFR. Look it up on Google, do your homework. And through those legislations, it actually defines FEMA as a very specific role. And I think it's very important to note that FEMA is not a first responder. FEMA is not your fireman. FEMA is not your police officer. That is you. And one thing that FEMA and really more of the government, the federal government is doing really through more of Department of Homeland Security is they're funding a program called the Citizen Corps program. And a component of that is something called CERT, which is a great acronym, but it's Community Emergency Response Team. What they're doing is funding local governments through the state to be able to educate people and train them in basic very basic first responder skills, how to do very basic search and rescue, how to do first aid, how to be able to take care of yourselves in your neighborhood after an event when the first responders are out really taking care of the really hard-hit areas.